This is week 4 in core volunteer training, and tonight our focus is a deep dive with Carbon Fee and Dividend. So we're really lucky. Tonight we actually have CCL's Global Strategy Director, Joe Robertson, with us on the line. And I'll just do a quick biography about, so Joe works with CCL volunteers in Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Pacific, and leads CCE's engagement with the United Nations, the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, and other multinational institutions, as well as being the lead strategist in a series of diplomatic dialogues aimed at accelerating the global transition to a climate-smart, sustainable economy. And Joe started as a CCL volunteer back in 2010 and is the author of a wonderful book. If you haven't had a chance to hear of it, it's called Building a Green Economy on the Economics of Carbon Pricing and the Transition to Clean Renewable Fuels. So tonight's kind of objectives really are looking at how the dividend works to eliminate carbon emissions, even without mandating new funding for alternatives. Secondly, to really understand why REMI, one of the chief macroeconomic studies that we've had done, commissioned on fee and dividend, and the results it shows on real disposable personal income, why that's so important, really getting familiar with that. And then lastly, how this combination of upstream pricing, having a steady price increase annually, and having that net dividend returned back to households, how all those wrap around to ensure integrity, efficiency, and a healthier market. So that's elegant length on the call. I'll pass it to you, and we'll just look forward to learning from here.
Well, thank you so much, Brett. It's great to be here, and it's great to share this. I find fee and dividend to be a really fun thing to talk about. When I first heard of it, I didn't quite understand how you would get really big change without deliberately driving investment into alternatives. And little by little, I realized this was so elegant, so simple, so clean, that it could actually cover the whole economy. And I just want to put that out there as the first thing to think about. Targeted solutions don't cover the whole economy. This one covers the whole economy, and that's really important. So I just put here as a subtitle, just something to think about. You know, carbon fee and dividend, it frees us from costly mistakes. That's one way to talk about the externalities problem, avoiding climate damage, et cetera. It builds value in the Main Street economy, and it also safeguards our sovereignty. And I'll come back to that later. It's not something we talk about all the time, but sometimes in the political environment we're in, that's an important point. So the first thing I want to focus on is what a market failure is. I think everybody may be familiar with the language, but I just want to kind of bring it down to the simple story. Climate change disrupts natural systems, and all other value depends on those things. It doesn't matter how much money you have if there's no rain. If there's no rain and there's no food, there's no civilization. And unfortunately, we are watching what happens when natural systems collide with human systems and there's breakdown. Those are failures of the system. A market failure is where that event or that phenomenon or that trend is created by something the market does. And so the market is not adequately telling us what the costs are going to be. So I just want to give an example. This is something, there's been a lot of work done to show that although the 12-year-long drought in Syria was not caused by climate change, it was worsened and deepened and prolonged by climate change. And the country of Syria found itself with an unbelievable water stress situation. Now, if you look at the two slides, one after the other, you see that where the reddest areas of extreme water stress were in the previous image, that's the parts of Syria that look a little bit green here. And they're only a little bit green because the agriculture has faded away. This is supposed to be farmland. You had total collapse of natural systems in Syria due to ongoing drought. And the result is conflict, disintegration of civilization, and millions of people living in camps in many different countries now. But there's more to that. For a lot of the young people, there's a whole generation that hasn't had a chance to go to school. That is an immense opportunity cost. It's almost impossible to quantify the amount of value lost when an entire generation is forced to not learn at all, or learn only part way, or learn strictly in an informal way. A couple of years ago, when there was a big earthquake in Nepal, we had CCL volunteers in Nepal were there helping out. And the earthquake, of course, was not caused by climate change, but the damage to Nepal and its people was made a lot worse by climate change, because the extreme ice melt in Himalayan glaciers led to the destabilization of mountainside villages. And hundreds of villages were swamped with landslides that may not have otherwise happened had there not been this chronic melting of the glaciers. There's just a few other places listed here that are experiencing ongoing worsening fallout from climate change. The fear that Yemen may end up with zero clean water is a very real problem. Many people think it's already there. A lot of aid is going in to try to make sure people have drinking water. Just one point I want to emphasize is Siberia. Recently, I had a chance to speak to one of the engineers working in that part of the world on permafrost melt. And he said 65% of Russia's territory is vulnerable to this problem. And when permafrost melts, it doesn't just release methane and ancient life and ancient diseases and things like that, but it also completely destabilizes the land. Permafrost doesn't turn to solid, dry ground. It turns to mush. And so the roads and railroads and pipelines and nuclear plants and cities that are built on that land all become inviable. So there's a huge cost, not just to Russia, but to the rest of the world if that continues to get worse. Now, in 1992, many people don't realize this, but the elder President Bush signed the Rio Climate Treaty. It was ratified and is officially constitutional law in the United States. And I say that because in the United States, under Article 6 of our Constitution, a ratified treaty is the supreme law of the land. That's why there's only been one case where a president withdrew from a ratified treaty without anything other than his own discretion. And that was when Jimmy Carter did that relating to China and Taiwan in the 1970s. It's the law, and it mandates that we end climate change, whether or not the rest of the world helps us. And that would be a very expensive proposition. Here you have some CCL people with other civil society representatives talking to the authors of the Paris Agreement, the people who were presiding over the diplomatic process that wrote the agreement. And here you have a universal agreement made among 193 countries just 3 months before, 2.5, 3 months before the Paris Agreement on climate. And if you don't know anything else about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, take a look at what each of them represent. These are all areas where every country in the world has deficits, where we haven't done enough good. And all of those deficits are costs. These are all market failures. They all need to be corrected, or they will correct for us. They'll self-correct and create harm to human civilization. So with all of that in mind, 196 countries came together in December of 2015 and agreed to what we call the Paris Agreement. Now, what that means is the whole world is now part of the solution. So it's not just on us anymore. Every country in the world is part of this, except for Syria, which is in a state of chaos, and Nicaragua, which thought it wasn't strong enough. To bring it back to our context, these are coal miners who went to a Senate Environment and Public Works Committee hearing a couple of years ago, right before CCL's national conference. And their message was, don't kill us. They said, you know, this isn't about Republican or Democrat. This isn't about we don't like the EPA or we don't like the environment or we don't like clean energy. They said, we're for all these things. We think we should have a clean environment, clean air, clean water. We think we should have clean energy. The thing is that everybody in this town forgets that we exist and doesn't seem to understand how devastating our situation is. They were more afraid of oil and gas, frankly, than they were of environmental regulations. But they are vulnerable, and that's the point. We're trying to figure out a way to solve climate change without hurting people and without creating destabilizing effects in the economy. So that's how CCL came to adopt fee and dividend as our policy. And the three basic elements are this. There's a fee, there's a dividend to households, and there's a border adjustment. Now, just the really short version is you put a steadily rising fee on carbon emitting fuels at the source, the mine, the well, or the port of entry to the United States. That fee goes up $10 per ton every year. And the reason it goes up steadily and can't be manipulated is because that provides certainty, not just to those who have to pay the fee, which is a relatively small group, people who produce fossil fuels, but it provides certainty to all investors and to the whole economy. Anyone who has that kind of fuel in their cost as a business, they know they have to start changing. And they'll know at what rate they have to start changing because they can see the cost rising. The dividend to households, it's 100% return to every household every month. And the reason for that is that it has a different impact than if you gave it back as a once-a-year tax credit or if you gave most of it to energy companies that are doing better things, picking winners and losers, so to speak. And our view is that the virtuous effect this has on our economy isn't just good for the economy, it's good for the climate, and it's the fastest way to get this done. I'll come back to that later. The border adjustment is just to make sure that we don't have industries that have to go to other places or try to cheat the system or work around this somehow. It allows us to keep the whole thing simple, and it allows those companies to keep operating here in a fair way on a level playing field. So Brett mentioned earlier real disposable personal income from the REMI study. Regional Economic Models, Inc. looked at 160 sectors of the US economy cross-referenced over a period of 20 years. Part of that modeling was drawing from observed economic history, but then they also added in what happens if you change some of the costs and prices. Now, real disposable personal income means it's adjusted for inflation. So if the value of a dollar goes down, then your real income is less. But if your income goes up more than the decreased dollar value, then your real income has gone up as well. So real disposable personal income means I personally have more than I used to and I can spend it. It's free for me to spend. And my spending today isn't going to bankrupt me tomorrow. That's real disposable personal income. Look at this chart. For 20 consecutive years with a fee and dividend in place, real disposable personal income goes up. It goes up at a national level as an average, and it also goes up per capita. It's extremely important that REMI found this with the most detailed, most dynamic macroeconomic study ever done of this kind of policy. Because if people can spend money, they can change the economic landscape. And here's what that did to the economic landscape, according to REMI. We get to cut CO2 emissions by 52% in just 20 years without any additional policies, just this pricing mechanism. Prevent 227,000 premature deaths, increase real disposable personal income each year for 20 years at least, increase the labor share of income. What that means is that instead of new income going mostly to capital, meaning big, rich investors make more and more because they're investing, that money's going to work. It's going to pay people and reward people for being productive. It means our economy has a base that can create a middle class that can grow. That's something that we haven't had for a long time. That trend has been going towards capital. Capital can move anywhere. Jobs stay here. It provides, because of all of this, a steady boost to the Main Street economy, adds 2.8 million new jobs, and it grows the economy overall. Now, if you think about what the Main Street economy is, here you've got a Main Street that looks pretty empty. And a lot of Main Street economies around the United States have a lot of empty storefronts. They don't have enough good paying jobs, and there are people looking for ways to change that. All of the different ways of changing that entail infusing money into local economies. Some people think you give tax cuts to banks and corporations. Some people think you give money directly to people and see what happens. But in all of those scenarios, the plan has nothing feeding it. It's just an expenditure. So we realize that if you look carefully at what fee and dividend does in the economy, it gives you a steady, resolute rise in carbon price. It internalizes costs incrementally, steadily, and with no leakage. It's simple, transparent, it's effective at reducing emissions. No leakage and effective at reducing emissions are kind of the same thing, because it means you can't keep emitting. The price drives you to stop. Building economic value at the human scale, and it's also easy to implement country by country, harmonizing across borders. That's important, because if we're going to follow the law of the '92 treaty, and if we're going to live up to the Paris Agreement and be a significant player in the new economy of the world, we have to find a way to do that. And it should be good for our economy. We took these 5 principles based on what Remy tells us about the fee and dividend plan, and we turned them into universal principles for effective carbon pricing. And what we found was people who liked carbon taxes with tax credits, people who liked cap and trade or emissions trading systems, they believe that their policies should also live up to these things. And that's not easy to do if you're not covering the whole economy. So that pushes someone who says, I like an emissions trading system, to say, why don't we cover the whole economy instead of just the electricity sector? Why don't we make sure that the offsets that we're including in our plan don't provide a way out, that they don't provide leakage or a way to game the system? Maybe we shouldn't even have them, for instance. That's a result of these principles which come out of the fee and dividend plan. And because it seems like these are universal principles that people believe would be qualities of good carbon pricing policies, we think fee and dividend is the best one, because it does all these things. You don't have to change it, modify it. So this is what's behind a Main Street economy that's not working. This is a place, this building is no longer there. Actually, it was torn down a couple of years ago. It's an old coal breaker. It's a place where an 11-story high building with a giant machine inside of it, basically, that's designed to move around and break down pieces of coal so that they're the right size for different uses, and then send them off to market. This building shut down in 1975, and for 4 decades, the town that lived from this building has had no economy at all. Zero. No economy. Think about that. I show it here because it's not just about coal being vulnerable. This building shut down in 1975. That has nothing to do with carbon pricing or climate policy or the Paris Agreement or even the 1992 treaty. 1975. It shut down because the market itself is designed to fail. The coal industry is imposing on its own workers, its own communities, and even ultimately its own best performing companies, a market failure, which is that the way that energy is being produced is too expensive and it's outdated. It's not designed to work anymore. So continuing to do that kind of thing isn't just a market failure for the climate, for human health, for the rest of us who don't have anything to do with this industry. It's also bad for the industry itself. The people working in it could have something else. And here you've got a kind of old-fashioned look at the future. And I show it because you see you've got a video screen there. Teslas have those now. So do other cars. This is a self-driving car, which means everyone can be facing each other. They don't have to be worrying about driving the car. And you see everything's put in order in a way where it's safer. That's the idea. Now, this is starting to happen now, but why wasn't it happening in the 1960s when people were making these drawings? Why did it take so long? Because the market wasn't working. Now, a quick look at what happens if you put money into the Main Street economy. This is an informal study that was done by someone of what happens at a local cash register. It happened in a cafe. They put a stamp on a dollar bill. This was 1998, I believe, in Pennsylvania. They put a stamp on a dollar bill, spent it at a local cafe, and they wanted to see, would they ever see it again? Where would it go? Could people tell them where it went? That exact same dollar bill was spent 30 times in 60 days in the same cafe. Now that's a good local business. People like that business, they keep coming back. And the same people maybe keep coming back. But whether it was spent in that cafe or another cafe, the fact that it was spent 30 times in 60 days in a Main Street business means that that single dollar bill became $180 of GDP extrapolated from 2 months to 12 months. $1 became $180. This is how the monthly dividend going into local economic activity, Remy shows us a lot of the job creation isn't in wind and solar. It's in restaurants and construction and health clinics, the kind of things that you spend more money on when you have a little more money every month. So keep that in mind. This is really important. This is a way to get that to happen where we don't have to take away from government programs and either give tax cuts or stimulus spending. It just happens naturally through the economy because of this plan. So a quick reminder, real disposable personal income, what it looks like, going up steadily. And now for the border adjustment. Now people get a little confused about why there's a border adjustment, what does it mean? Even if everyone in the whole economy is doing really, really well, and we don't need a border adjustment to protect the US economy or the US financial sector, there are still energy intensive, trade exposed industries that will spend more. And they may be tempted to seek shelter elsewhere. They may be tempted to relocate to a country that wants to be the haven where there's no carbon pricing, where you can burn as much as you want. That's not necessarily good for that company because they won't be part of the future economy if they go that route. And it won't be good for us either if those kind of companies leave. We lose performative value that we have here already. So you level the playing field. You just say if another country doesn't have a carbon price or doesn't have a carbon price that's equal to ours, then things that are coming in have to be leveled so that there is a fair way to treat those who produce here and have to pay this cost. Actually, I want to just re-emphasize the thing I said earlier at the beginning about sovereignty. The World Trade Organization doesn't treat this kind of border adjustment as a protectionist tariff. You can impose fees like this to protect against environmental damage by leveling the playing field. It's a way to actually project your intended policy outcomes out into the world. Other countries would be better served to just pass a law like this than they would to try to avoid it somehow or game the system. And certainly better than to pay us that extra fee. The other thing is that because we've passed this law, whether it's an environmental law or it's a labor law, like we don't want t-shirts made by slave children. We don't want children enslaved. And we believe we have a right to stop that, or at least to stop it from happening here, to stop our money from funding it. The World Trade Organization and international law recognize that because we have our own political system, we've passed laws and we have a right to make sure that sovereignty is not eroded by cheaters in other places. So that's an important point, and I don't think we talk about that quite enough. There's certain conversations that you're all going to have where that's clearly going to be important. And I think it's important to just understand the legality of it. Our national sovereignty, our democratic process, our democratically elected legislators, all of those powers inherent in our system that protect us as citizens and individuals and communities and give us representative government, those are all protected by having this simple additional element to this policy. And so just a quick recap: fee, dividend, border. It's very simple. It's designed to be simple. And now I'm happy to take any questions you might have about any details of this.
Thank you so much, Joe. And we can't thank you enough, Joe. Let's close tonight before dividing up by giving you a huge round of applause for your availability and really giving us some new insights and a fresh way of looking at fee and dividend. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone back here at the same time, same place next week. So.